Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, September 6th. We are privileged to be meeting and doing our work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Hatsqualowin, Queesaluktamuk, Latskahomish, Okumeo. Council, motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. So this council doesn't have that many meetings left. And we do have some important business to take care of before the end of our term. But today we get to start with a celebration because we should have a bit of fun as we finish off our term. And one of our staff members has achieved a really important milestone, and that is Frank Rawlings, who is our manager of bylaw and animal enforcement. And he's here with us today, along with Megan Latimer. And so it is my pleasure to say that today we are recognizing Frank, the district's manager of bylaw services and animal control, for his extensive work experience and academic achievements in the service of local government. Mr. Rawlings is being awarded the Certificate in Local Government Service Delivery by the BC Board of Examiners. And it's customary for Mayor and Council to present the certificate to the recipient to formally acknowledge their achievement, and it is an achievement. And so just so the public and council knows, the BC Board of Examiners is a body that is established by legislation and is comprised of representatives from the BC government, the Local Government Management Association, and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. And the Board of Examiners offers certification to recognize the professional standing of local government employees and officers who meet certain academic and work experience criteria. So Mr. Rawlings has devoted over 15 years to the bylaw services field, and his career spanned from the city of North Vancouver and now to the District of Squamish. He completed his associate certificate in leadership at BCIT in 2014 and graduated from Capilano University in 2015 with a certificate in local government administration. So it is my very great pleasure to present Frank with his certificate in local government service delivery. On behalf of council, it is my pleasure to present you with your certificate in local government service delivery.
Great.
We are so proud that you are a member of our staff, and we are so thankful for the work that you do and the leadership you provide to our bylaw and animal services team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
We should turn it around so you can see it. All right, so I wonder if we could take a moment just to get a picture with Frank and all of council, just standing up there, and our CAO. Do you want to hold that?
Sure.
Yeah, inside work for you. Good to see you. Get it ready. Just panorama. Stolen one. Thanks for coming this afternoon. All right. That may have been the easiest thing that we did all day, but it's really great to be able to honor and recognize the hard work of our staff. No doubt about it, we have one of the best staff groups in the province, so we should celebrate that. So we're on to item 4, staff reports, and item 1 is the 2023 to 2027 Squamish Lillooet Regional District Financial Plan Submission for the Aquatic Center, and I'll be turning it over to our finance team to introduce themselves and the item.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I'm Senior Financial Analyst for the District of Squamish, and with me is Heather Boxrud, the CFO. Today, we are going to present a couple of different financial matters for your consideration, and we will start with the 2023 through 2027 financial plan for the Squamish Lillooet Regional District Aquatic Center request. So we do have an objective today. There is a motion before you, which is a resolution that council approve the 2023 through 2027 local service area budget request, community facilities, Squamish Aquatic Center, for submission to the Squamish Lillooet Regional District. There's a brief summary here, but I'll give you a little bit of background. Each year we get a request from the SLRD for us to submit a funding request to them on behalf of the Aquatic Center. And we are required to have that passed by resolution of council and delivered to the SLRD by October 31st. So the highlights this year are the operating cost is $1,390,000. There is a special operating project for $50,000 for the steam room, and that brings the total operating request to $1.44 million. In addition to that, there are two capital requests. One for excuse me, it's all had some time off this summer, including my tongue. So confined space, and the second one for boiler replacement, totaling $100,000 between the two projects. This is our request. There is a complete package along with RTC in your council package today. I am open to answer any questions you may have at this point. Otherwise, we'll just step back to this slide. And this is the summary and highlights of what their request is. And if I can click the buttons correctly, I will pause here and let council consider the resolution that is before them and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Council, any questions? Councilor Pettengill.
Yeah, we've had some feedback on the Britannia and Furry Creek projects. And I think some concern about whether or not the growth there will put a burden on some of our municipal facilities. And I'm wondering if this is the sort of budget where we might expect to see some of those future impacts, and if this is the appropriate place to sort of, in some ways, have that discussion with the SLRD.
I'll turn it over to Ms. Glenday, our CAO.
Thank you. Through the mayor, at this time, I am setting up meetings or working with the CAO of the SLRD to talk about that topic specifically. And so looking forward, how can we be more strategic and comprehensive around the growth of the Area D developments and how that can affect Squamish and how we can benefit. So this is not the particular budget right now to be doing that, but I can assure you that staff are working on it with the SLRD. Thank you.
Councillor Reese.
Thank you. And similar question, but I won't belabor that part. But I noticed in the report, it keeps mentioning that the pool is owned by the SLRD, but we pay the operating costs, which I assume is 100% of the operating costs. So there's one issue is should there be contributions from somebody like the SLRD or Area D, for example, for the population that they have that might use the pool. And that's what I think Ms. Glendy is dealing with. But the second point is, over the years, we've paid down the debt, I think, that was incurred to fund the pool initially. Does the ownership ever revert to the district, or does it continue with the SLRD? And secondly, what would the next one look like? In other words, we're talking about in our capital plan expansion of, among other things, pool, skating rink, et cetera, library. Is this funding model available for a future deal? Does it impact on our debt, et cetera? Without getting into too involved a discussion, are there some quick answers to that?
Through the chair, if I may. The original debt that was issued has expired. Subsequent to that, the SLRD has issued additional debt related to capital projects, capital investments made at the request of the district, but funded by the SLRD. So as a result of that, there's still an outstanding debenture to be paid by the SLRD. So the current agreement that we have has been extended to the end of that debt term. That debt term ends, I believe, in 2035. So we still have a long-term agreement with them to continue this plan and this funding method. Needless to say, I think that this would be open to review, potentially as part of the discussions that CAO Glenday is having with respect to further contributions based on population that may be impacted by changes in population within the SLRD. And also, I would think that the SLRD would want to have some contact with us and some discussion if we were planning a significant and costly expansion of the aquatic center and had an expectation that they would have a direct stake in that. So I think that the current agreement is there, and I think we'll proceed. As Ms. Glenday had outlined just a moment ago, there will be further discussions with the SLRD around cost sharing based on population. And I would anticipate that if there was significant expansion of the pool, that there would be further discussions around that. But at this point in time, I can't comment on those discussions. One and two, we don't have a time frame for an expansion of the pool at this point. Thank you.
Ms. Boxer, did you want to add to that? And then I'll come back to you, Councillor Reese.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, just the second part of your question there, should the agreement be extended in a different format or a similar format to do, further improvements? It does not affect the debt capacity if it's in this model. So certainly something we'd want to consider.
Any other questions? Is that a question? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Stronach.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just wondering if staff can speak a little bit to the process that we use in terms of determining what upgrades we are going to be making to the existing pool infrastructure, given that we do have kind of a medium to long-term idea of renovating the pool more broadly, but that's a long ways off. So I'm just wondering if staff can speak to the balance that we make in terms of investments currently to keep the pool running and how we decide what projects are moving forward.
I'll do my best. So through the chair, projects that are directly related to facilities operations or facilities maintenance, because both of those things are guided and directed by district staff, we put forward proposals to the SLRD to have these funded either through an operating project, which is funded on an annual basis from the annual draw, or from the capital pool, which the SLRD maintains on their behalf for this facility. And we basically have a working agreement that anything over a specified amount, and I think that number is probably $250,000 to $300,000 in the capital side, we will give them as much lead time as possible so that they're well aware and can make any adjustments or changes that they need to on their end to ensure that they can fund this, in a timely manner using their processes. So I think that those would continue as we move forward. Obviously, anything that would result in a significant rebuild of the pool or a significant expansion, I would think we would be well aware of that long in advance, and we would connect with the SLRD to ensure that we work through whatever ramifications that may have and whatever impact that would have on our cost sharing process. So at this point in time, we haven't identified any significant expansions, but it is anticipated that within the next one or two financial plan cycles, projects of that nature will start to be pushing in towards the end of the plan.
Mr. Russell, I think when we discussed the capital plan in July, there was a new pool feature in the capital plan, and it's not included here, but maybe that's because it's not being funded through the SLRD, but through some other means. But I just wondered if it's not listed here, but it's listed in our capital plan, that's okay.
Yes, that is okay. There are two items that may come to mind within the capital plan. One is the pool feature, and I believe that was a 2022 project, which sort of perhaps 2021/2022 project, which should be completed this year if it is not. That is being jointly funded by the SLRD and by the district. The SLRD has built up a slight surplus in the aquatic fund account that they maintain with us, which basically is if their annual stipend is greater than the actual expenses to run the facility, we retain the difference in a separate fund for future costs or future expenses associated with the aquatic center. So we have built up a little bit of money in that pool, pardon the pun, in that group, let's say, and so we offered to pay for the replacement of the feature in conjunction with them. There are some additional fairly significant projects, I believe, planned in the next year or two as part of to coincide with the projects that will be done under the new grant that we just received. So there is some coordination of capital projects that will be undertaken with respect to that. And to be fair, I'd have to dive into the details a little more to be able to answer the specifics on the individual projects.
But those capital projects don't need to appear in this budget at this time, the ones that will be impacted by the grant.
I think the one that's like, there's one piece that we're contemplating doing under the grant, And so that's actually within the grant itself, as opposed to being a separate project.
But we can't ask them to start increasing, like, looking for ways to increase that reserve in anticipation of our bigger capital expenditures down the road to expand the aquatic center. At this point in time, we can only take what's saved from operations.
Again, I believe that a request of that nature will be open to negotiation, and I think that given that the CAOs are looking forward to meeting to have those types of discussions, that probably is something that would come up.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Race?
Well, it's maybe a broader discussion, but the last plan I saw for the upgrade of Brennan Park, which is a couple of years old now, talked about an entirely new 8-lane pool in addition to what exists there today, which at the time was a surprise to me. I expected the 6-lane existing pool to just be sort of expanded to 8, but it came back as an additional 8-lane. And so I'm wondering if it doesn't impact our capital plan or our borrowing capacity. What might be stopping us from just going out and doing that, building an 8-lane pool, expanding it? And I don't know, it was in the early 90s when the existing pool was built, and I assume the funding model put in place initially, but where the money comes from, what has to be done to trigger that. And obviously there's an annual cost to that. But the big hurdle we've had with a lot of these projects and the discussions we've had over the last year or two has been the limits on our borrowing capacity. And if this doesn't impact the borrowing capacity, what's stopping us from going out there and repeating it for a pool or a skating rink or a library or something like that, the next level of capital projects where we do feel constrained with our borrowing power?
Through the chair, if I may, I'm going to suggest there's two things that are ongoing currently that will influence these decisions. One, as part of the overall recreation plan, our director of infrastructure and construction, in coordination with the directors of the recreation center, are in discussions with various stakeholders and users of the various facilities, so the arena, the pool, etc., to try to determine what the community's requirements will be as we move into the future. So my understanding is that has not been completed or is not finished yet at this stage. And as a result of that, we should anticipate that there will be new projects coming forward, likely in the next 5-year financial plan, potentially, depending on the timing. And at that point, we would then need to have a better and clearer understanding of how we wish to finance those and whether or not those types of major expansions would be included in the existing cost sharing mechanism. I might suggest that the existing cost sharing mechanism has benefited the district fairly well over the years. And to be fair, the SLRD may balk at a $10 to $15 million price tag for an expansion if they were expected to fund that by themselves. Potentially, they may be more open to some type of cost sharing arrangement with them to expand the existing facility or add additional components to that facility. At this point, we can't tell because we're not 100% sure of what that project would look like. And without having a better idea of what we want to build, it's kind of hard for us to approach the RD to ask how much they're willing to kick in on a questionable project, right? Or no, I won't say questionable, but an undefined project. So at this point, I think we need to figure out what do we need to build. And then at that point, we can have a more fulsome discussion with the SLRD as to how we can cost share those facilities. Does that answer your question?
All right, thanks, council. So the recommendation from staff is to approve the 2023 to 27 local service area budget requests for community facilities for the Aquatic Center. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. Any further comments? Certainly appreciate council's diligence in terms of thinking ahead and how we fund all of our facilities and work with our partners to do that. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is item 2 under staff reports, which is our 2023 to 2027 utilities financial plan submission. I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you very much, Mayor, members of council. Feet sorted here, and we'll continue on with part 2. Part 2 today is the utility fund workshop. And again, we have some resolutions. In this instance, we have 2 resolutions. The first is that the district include the service level changes presented in this report in the 2023 through 27 financial plan. And the second is that the district include the solid waste rates presented in this report in the 2023 fees and charges bylaw. And as I'm sure you're aware, we'll go through more of this in detail as we work our way through the report. So this is the timeline that we're working with. And you can see the red box there circling September 6th. That's where we are today, and we're presenting the utilities and the Aquatic Center. And our goal is to present all the various components of the financial plan by September 27th so that council has an opportunity to, this council has an opportunity to weigh in on what they believe is the requirements at this point in time for 2023. In addition to this, I should note that there is a survey, a budget survey being undertaken by the communications group, and that is still open for additional input and information from the public and will be so until Saturday, September 10th. And my understanding is that after that, our communications group intends to bring back to council a response and should I say summary of what the findings were in the budget survey. So hopefully that will inform both decisions related to today and also inform decisions related to additional presentations that council will be receiving in the upcoming weeks. So we're going to talk about some of the highlights. And what we've done, this is a slight departure from the format that you have seen presented previously, but we felt that it was easier rather than trying to highlight individual components. It was to focus on a specific utility all at once. So deal with all the things related to the individual utilities one by one. So the first one we're going to talk about is the solid waste fund. And here is the summary. A recommendation is that the 2023 collection and landfill rates be increased by 5%. And we wanted to highlight a service level change request, which is due to the completion of the landfill gas flare project. We now have ongoing operations and maintenance of said landfill gas flare, and that work is going to cost an extra $45,000 approximately. The work, the people on the ground component of the work that's being done by the district staff, those staff work for the wastewater department. Okay. And so you will see a request from the wastewater department to increase their staff to allow them to do this work, among other things. So there is a sharing of manpower, let's say. And thank you very much for the correction. I'm working at it. I'll get better. And the last thing of note is that we would like to highlight that as a result of the debt funding of the vertical wall in 2021 through 2025, we have significant increase in financial costs. Those financial costs, or the cost increase, I should say, to service the debt related to the wall outstrip our ability to increase rates, utility rates, both for residential customers and also the landfill rates. We are planning to increase the rates by 5% per year on an ongoing basis to bring the rates up high enough to ensure that they fully fund the utility. This in 2023 will be year 3 of 5, and the reserve draw is anticipated in 2023 to be approximately $100,000. That's a significant reduction from the reserve draw in the 2022 budget, which was $360,000. So we're making progress. We're moving in the right direction. By 2024, it is anticipated that the overall solid waste fund will be in the positive, and there will no longer be a reserve draw, that we will get over the hump and get back to, I won't call it solvency, but positive revenue over expense standard, and move forward from there. I should also comment that, as it says in the last note, Council did approve the use of the solid waste reserve to smooth the impact of financing costs in the 21 through 25 financial plan. So we don't keep coming back to you with this concept. We brought the concept to you previously. Council endorsed the concept, and we're continuing to do this. This is why you will see a 5% rate increase proposed again for 2024 and for 2025. That is to get us to the point where we need to be to ensure that revenues will exceed expenses as we move forward within the solid waste utility. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any specific questions related to solid waste, and then we can move on. Or if you would prefer, we can go through all 3 of the utilities and ask whatever questions you would like.
Let's go through all 3 utilities, and then we'll open up the floor to questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Within the wastewater fund, we're not proposing a rate change for 2023. We are requesting a service level change to fund half of the utility manager position. We are also asking for an increase in wastewater staff, and that's, excuse me, the staff will be used to do both the O&M work on the landfill gas flare and manage additional systems growth within the wastewater system. And that request is for $66,000. We have a major capital project which is ongoing right now, which is the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, and this is DCC funded. Currently, the amount that we wish to withdraw from the DCC fund exceeds the balance of the DCC fund. And so we will be using interfund borrowing between the wastewater reserve and wastewater DCC to ensure that there is sufficient capital available. So that's something we haven't come up against before. In the past, historically, we've been able to manage our DCC projects and delay them if there was not sufficient revenue available to fully fund the project. In this instance, and as you'll see later in the water reserve instance, we were unable to do that. The expansion and upgrade of the existing wastewater treatment plant is required the existing plant does not meet all seismic requirements of a facility of this nature and therefore needs to be upgraded. In addition to that, the existing capacity of the plant has reached its maximum and will very soon, without expansion, not be able to meet the demands of the community. So we're at a point where DCC funding aside, we need to push forward with this expansion. So what we are doing is we are using the wastewater reserve to backstop the DCC, the amount of DCCs collected, to ensure that we have sufficient funding to push forward with this major capital project. In addition to that, this capital project last year, we applied for a grant for $6 million, which is about 40% of the overall price. We are waiting to hear from the government whether we get the grant, I should say. If we do not receive the grant, then we will probably have to borrow a portion of that $6 million that the grant would otherwise have funded. So it's a large project. It's a costly project. It's going to have a significant impact on the wastewater reserve and interfund borrowing. At this point, because the project is not complete and we do not have to fully fund it, it does not have a direct impact on utility rates, which is why we are not increasing the rates this year. In addition to that, and the last comment with respect to wastewater fund is the wastewater reserve contribution approximates the asset management plan target. So basically, the asset management plan that was presented to you earlier this year suggested that we needed approximately $2.7 million contribution annually from wastewater, and that is pretty close to where we are. When you round the numbers off, we're at the same $2.7 million. So that also indicates that there is not a need today to increase our utility rates. That being said, that asset management model does not include the $15 million new project that we are about to finish in the next year or year and a half. So when we reevaluate the asset management plan and work that into the long-term financial model, we will be adjusting the amount of money required to match the asset management target because we will have additional assets. Okay, so what this means is there's no need to increase the rates today, but we do see pressure both on the reserve and due to asset management requirements that there will be pressure to increase the rates in the future. So don't know exactly how much or when, but we should anticipate that there will be pressure to increase the rates as we move forward. So that's the summary of the wastewater fund. And lastly, the summary of the water fund. This one looks a lot like the other one, except with one less W. So there is no rate change required for 2023 for water. Again, we are sharing the utility manager between water and wastewater. This costs $81,000, the service level change. The difference between the two is that there are some one-time costs associated with new positions, desks, computers, things like that, and they're being charged to this side. We have a major capital project in water, which is also DCC funded, and that is the water reservoir. And again, we have the same situation in that we need to build this reservoir because of population growth and demand. And we don't have enough money in the DCC fund, but we do have enough money between the DCC fund and the water reserve to fully fund the project. So we will again be doing interfund borrowing between the two to ensure that the project can go forward. And in this instance of water, the water reserve contribution again approximates the asset management plan target. The asset management plan target is $1.9 million, and that is roughly $1.9 million is the amount that we're putting into the reserve. Again, the same comments as made with respect to wastewater about the impacts of updating the asset management plan to reflect new assets and updating the asset management plan to have it work more tightly with the long range financial model would indicate that with an increase in assets, there will be a higher amount required to go into to meet the asset management plan target. And so again, although a rate increase is not required in 2023, we do anticipate that there will be pressure on both the reserve and from the asset management side for potential rate increases in the future. Can't be much more specific than that as to what the amounts will be until we are able to work through those calculations. But seeing as we're meeting the target today, and we know that the target will go up as a result of adding new assets, we do anticipate that there will be pressure to increase rates in future years. So we want to show you the highlights of the rates. And what you are seeing is that the water and the sewer rates are not increasing. The garbage totes are increasing by $10 for a small tote, $20 for a medium tote, $30 for a large tote, which equate to various different percentages, as you can see on this slide and information that was provided. And so the overall increase to a residential customer is going to be somewhere between 0.8% and 1.8% of their existing bill, depending on what size of, solid waste receptacle they have to maintain. And at this point, I'm going to pause and open it to council for discussion and feedback, and to, I guess, just remind us that there are 2 resolutions associated with this report. So be happy to hear your discussion and answer your questions as possible, and seek your direction with respect to the resolutions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Russell. So council, any questions on any of the 3 utilities? Councilor Ferd, and then Councilor Race, then Stoner.
Thank you. I see with the DCC fund shortfall and the internal borrowing to offset that, I appreciate the solution, but I'm curious about sort of the initial problem around the DCC not having the funds that required when we need it. And I'm curious if staff's perspective on once we've done this piece, is there an issue with the DCC funding model, or is this purely a timing issue? But as described, if the DCC fund will be paying back the other funds, so it sounds like it's okay, but it just feels like we're in a bit of I want to make sure that this is not just a symptom, but that there's not a bigger issue there with the DCC funds.
Through the chair, to be fair, I think part of the issue may be that our last round of DCC bylaws date back to, hope I got my math correct here, but I believe it's 2015, and could be out by a year. Okay, and so there was like a 5-year gap where we didn't increase the rates between 2015 and 2020. I think there was significant development through that time frame. I think what we're seeing now is that 5-year gap is maybe too long, and we would probably be in a better place had the rates been increased over that period of time. That's great. That 2020 hindsight, can't change that now. We do have a new bylaw, which I believe is coming to you this evening for 4th reading. And so I think we've addressed the base problem of the rates being needing to be reevaluated and increased. So I think that we've addressed that portion of it. I think the other portion is what is the cycle that we are going to use to review the DCC bylaw? And I think in a time frame of rapid growth, it's fairly imperative to ensure that that's done on a reasonably frequent basis. So I don't know the exact timing of how frequently we're anticipating doing that, but I don't believe we're planning on waiting another 5 years. So I think that we see there's a gap, and I think we're putting forward processes to address it. And the fact that we have a new DCC bylaw coming into force at this point in time will help to address it because the rates have gone up.
Mr. Buxton, can you just clarify what our estimated timing is for reviewing the DCC bylaw and when it was last updated?
I want to say that the previous one was 2015 was the first amendment that I recollect in my tenure here. The second one, I believe, was 2018, and we literally had a year between that and starting the next cycle, and that was started earlier this year and will get done tonight. We probably should be looking at it biannually. Some communities look at it annually. That's a bit of a heavy lift, but certainly 2 to 3 years is the longest at this point. We should let the cycle run. So we will be looking at another review in 2024.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And in dealing with the DCC bylaw, I was sort of struck by how prescriptive and controlled what can be included and so on. So with this sort of creative problem solving, I just want to make sure I know things that presented here are on side, but it does allow in DCC funding to pay for a project through sort of servicing internal debt, internal borrowing. Is that?
Yes, the DCC funding mechanism does allow for the inclusion of interest costs associated with funding projects.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm glad that that's there to get us through this. And thank you for the creative problem solving with it. Thank you.
Councillor Race?
Thank you. So going through the report, my attention was, as you can imagine, was captured when I came to the words accumulated surplus. And it was on the financial plan summary down at the bottom. And I was curious about that, which I'm assuming, of course, is different from the operating accumulated surplus, which we've renamed and put some parameters around. But I was unclear about, because in addition to that, there's a reserve fund for solid waste, separate one for water, separate one for sewer. So I'm curious about this accumulated surplus we have in utilities and where it comes from, why it's by itself as opposed to being part of, or the monies that come out of the different utilities don't go to their reserves. Why does it end up in a general one? And are there any parameters around, like we've done with the one from the operating budget, are there any parameters around how it might be spent?
Through the chair, to address your questions, Councillor Race, we have the answers. So they're like this. Each of the funds, and we have 4 funds, 3 utility plus general. Each of the funds has its own accumulated surplus. So by default, if there is a surplus in any given year, the surplus, 2 things can be done with the surplus. Well, more than 2, but let's just keep it simple. 2 things. You put the surplus into the reserve, or if you do not put the surplus into the reserve, the surplus falls to accumulated surplus and just becomes part of the accumulated surplus. In keeping with the process that we are currently using in the general fund and have used historically in the utility funds, At the end of the year, as part of the year-end financial process, we look at what the balance is in that accumulated surplus, and we transfer the bulk of it into the capital reserve on an annual basis. So it is showing a residual going into the reserve. That's true. But at the end of the year, we would then transfer whatever the true residual is, because there's going to be a variance potentially in the year, higher rates, lower expenses, whatever that might be. We would then transfer whatever the balance in surplus, basically. I mean, maybe not down to the last dollar, but to the nearest tens of thousands, let's say. We would take the balance and put that into the capital reserve so that it could be used to fund future capital projects. So it's a little different than in the general reserve, in the general fund, where we have a specific general reserve, which is held, to cover off emergencies, etc. In this instance, due to the nature of the utilities, the goal of all excess utility funding is to go into the capital pool to allow the utility to be able to fund future capital projects in the most economical way possible. So it's obviously cheaper to fund a project using reserves than it is to use debt. So any additional surplus that accumulates or builds up over the year is put into the capital pool at the end of the year as part of the overall year-end process. And we bring that information to you at year-end as part of the financial statement process and go, here's the resolution of any surpluses.
So you mentioned capital reserve. Is that another separate reserve, separate from these ones? Could these ones be used for non-capital purposes?
The water and wastewater capital reserves are used for capital only. And the solid waste reserve, we asked council specifically for an exemption on that one so we could use that to fund the shortfall in operating within the solid waste. But otherwise, these reserves that we're referring to, water is water capital reserve and wastewater capital reserve. Their parameters do not allow for the use of to fund operating. We want to fund operating, that needs to be done through rates.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair. My first question is with regards to water and wastewater, and the staff recommendation is to not increase the rates this year. But you mentioned if we look into 2024, there's some observable pressure that's coming in terms of increasing those rates. We are drawing on the reserves fairly heavily, and we have a gap between our expenses and our DCC reserves. And so I'm just curious why staff are not proposing a rate hike this year.
The reason, through the chair, the reason that we're not proposing a rate hike this year is that we intend to bring forward a comprehensive asset management plan and funding mechanism around that asset management plan as part of the 2024 through 2028 financial plan. And so we thought it prudent to include all of them and bring all of that forward to council at one time rather than bringing the utilities separately. We didn't see the need specifically to increase either the water or wastewater rates in the current year. And so we felt that we could put that off for a year and then bring a full package to council, including all of the various funds and how asset management was going to impact all of them. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's helpful just to understand the logic behind that recommendation. My other question was going to be around the interfund borrowing, and I'm curious what risk we're putting ourselves at, given that we are seeing rising interest rates and potentially a slowdown in development. If we are depending on the DCCs to refill kind of that interfund reserve, what happens if the rate of development slows for replenishing those reserves?
And we've included reserve continuity schedules for the utility reserves in the package that you have. And I think that you will see that within the both water and wastewater, our reserves drop from somewhere in the $8 to $9 million range down to lows with transfers, etc., of somewhere in the $1 to $2 million range. We would consider anything under $1 million to be too low, realistically, and perhaps at a level where it could put us into jeopardy with respect to an emergency repair or something like that. I'm sure Mr. Buxton can probably update me on the number, but I believe that either late last year or early this year, there was a main break on the line, the water line to the terminal. And I think it cost us something like $400,000 to fix. So we want to ensure that there's a minimum level within the utilities that we don't slip below, because at that point we think that it starts to get a little dangerous with respect to potential emergencies. Given that we are above those numbers, we think it's reasonable at this point in time that we not have a rate increase this year. So that's kind of what our lower limit is. And then we do acknowledge that as part of the overall asset management plan, we think that there will be a requirement, and then we'll have a better idea of what that longer term target would look like, and hope to be able to present a plan that would involve smooth rates rather than having them spike one year and go up and down, but just pick a number over a longer term and keep it more constant so people know what the expectations are. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I have two more quick questions, just on a special operating project. The water master plan update, the description says that we'll have the water meters in by 2021 and implement a new rate structure in 2022, but we're still implementing water meters. So I'm just curious if now is still the right time to be doing the water master plan update, given that we don't have that information.
My understanding is twofold. We anticipate that the remainder of meters will be going in the next 2 years. We believe that we have sufficient information, sufficient numbers of meters installed to provide a good baseline for what information metering will provide us as we move forward. So we think that the timing is appropriate to have the master plan updated. The other reason that that the engineering group wanted to have the master plan updated is updating the master plan kind of ties into some of their longer range concepts and plans. So where do they go after metering is completed, and what are going to be the impacts of changes to rates as a result of metering? And so those types of things would potentially influence the master plan, because they would obviously influence revenue streams and pricing accordingly.
All right. And then finally, on the capital projects, there is a request for a new tandem axle vacuum truck, which is services that are currently contracted out, but there was no combination request for a service level change specifically. So I'm just want to make sure that that can be serviced by our existing staff levels for that new truck.
Thank you, Roland. My name is Ben Konashenko. I'm the utilities manager in the district's public works department. And through the chair, we've pushed out the request for the vacuum truck a couple of years now, mainly due to the fact that we don't have enough trained operators. So we're kind of working on our internal succession planning on getting equipment operators that can run a piece of equipment like that. So we would put forward a service level change likely next year to coincide with the year that that truck would come online for service. Right now, the other additional thing is that most of our heavy duty fleet vehicles are taking 12 to 18 months just to obtain because of the market and just the setbacks that most manufacturers are experiencing. So there's some time and some wiggle room there.
I'm just saying now that's in the 2024 column. So got that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council, on any? Oh, yes. Sorry, Councillor Pettingill. Go ahead.
Yeah, so on page 8 of our report, it talks about the 14.7 million in upgrades on the wastewater treatment, which started in 2021, which, as I understand from the report, is largely around growth. And then on page 9 of the report, it talks about another 15 million starting around 2026 for seismic upgrades, which are necessary. But there's a comment to the effect of, this is effectively redoing all the whole plant as I read it. So I want to sort of understand it, if that's accurate. From reading the detail later on in the report, it seemed like these were more distinct things and additive as opposed to just sort of replacing all our previous work in 2026. And I'm just wondering if staff can explain, especially this 2026 project. Is it a replacement of everything we sort of will have recently done, or is it adding on seismic protection?
Through the chair, I have
Mr.
people
Kenishenko
joining
is
me
here.
again.
I'm glad I came down in person. Thank you for asking. So through the chair, the wastewater treatment plant journey through the upgrade has been interesting. We've discovered a lot about that site and that property. Not of it, a lot of it good news necessarily. There's been a change in the building code. Basically, that says all water and wastewater treatment infrastructure facilities have to be built for post-disaster requirements. And the geotechnical studies that have been done on the property there have not come back in a favorable manner. So we're doing a lot of ground improvements for the existing upgrade. A couple of the key findings from those reviews were that a lot of the existing tankage and infrastructure is either below flood construction level or isn't constructed to post-disaster earthquake standard. So the existing upgrade is getting us a piece of infrastructure, a tank, a process that will meet post-disaster requirements, and then future upgrades will be kind of working back from that, slowly bringing the plant into compliance with those requirements, kind of in a piece by piece manner.
Okay, so just to clarify then, we're not upgrading the same parts of the facility twice in a sort of an 8-year span. This is, we're kind of doing the best we can with the requirements we have, but I guess I'm just trying to understand the wording in the report, because it does make it sound like we're doing some of the work almost twice, but it sounds like that's not what we're doing.
Mr. Kenishenko, maybe you can explain what the upgrade is we're doing right now so people see a lot of equipment on site, and then work backwards from there. So we're adding something, and then we're going to go back and upgrade what we have. So start with what we're adding, and then what we would then upgrade starting in 2026.
Okay, thank you for the guidance. And just to be clear, so the current upgrade is to add an additional biological treatment process to the facility. So that's creating more capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. We're slightly about 15% under capacity currently in the regulations, and that's what the current upgrade is addressing. So future upgrades will be addressing the fact that we have some processes that are under threat if an earthquake or a similar event were to happen in the district.
Any other questions? All right, so council staff have two recommendations on the agenda. One is to approve the 2023 utility service level changes for inclusion in the five-year financial plan, and the other is to approve the 2023 utility rates for inclusion in the utility rates and charges bylaw. Is someone that wants to move that? It's moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments? Comments? Councillor Stoner? Sorry, Ms. Murray?
Could we do them separately? Thank you.
So we'll move the first one. That's moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Herford. Councillor Stoner, do you want to speak to the first one? Okay, don't speak to the first one then. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Who would like to move the utility rates? Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Herford. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks to staff for their work on this. The utility rates are often an interesting piece of the budget, given kind of the way that they're compartmentalized from the rest of the operating and special and capital projects. But I think I did have some concerns first reading it in terms of how much we're drawing on reserves. I know especially the previous council worked really hard to build up those reserves and take a really judicious approach to how we fund our utilities. But I think now that we are at that level of $8+ million in reserve, it makes sense to start to draw on them. I was a little bit hesitant by not increasing the wastewater and water rates for this year, but also appreciate staff's approach to trying to have a broader lens of what that number should look like. And so that work that we've done on the asset management plan and bring that back and bring a more fulsome approach to how we increase those rates over time. I will look forward to that discussion for the 2024 budget. So thanks to staff.
Other comments? I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and I think in today's inflationary environment, it's nice to see something not go up. So I think our citizens will appreciate that. But I can see that the reason driving that is not because we want to keep rates low, but because we've done a good job and sort of starting to plan for the future and build up our reserves and understand what our capital needs are over time. So I think that's work that was started several councils ago. And I think the work that will happen in 2024, as Councillor Stoner said, will give that broad lens again to see how we need to change rates or transitions people's thinking as we plan for these next upgrades and the growth in our community. So I think it's a thoughtful and wise approach. And I'm just appreciative that this council has again laid additional foundation and groundwork for the next council around sound financial management of our assets. So thank you for the work on this. Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So council, we will entertain a motion to close. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. And we will reconvene at 2 p.m. in the closed.